I didn't realize that a normal evening at home would become the moment I stopped trusting the person I had built my life with. There was no shouting, no obvious fight. Just one sentence that didn't feel right, and the silence that followed it. That's usually how things begin. Quietly. Before I continue, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. It was late afternoon, and the house felt unusually tense for no clear reason. My wife, Emily, stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, moving with sharp, controlled motions. Everything looked normal, but the atmosphere felt off, like something unsaid was sitting between us. "I'm heading out later," she said without looking at me. "Where to?" I asked, not thinking much of it at first. She paused briefly. "Sarah's birthday dinner. Just a small thing." I nodded. "What time should I be ready?" That's when she stopped completely. "You don't need to come," she said. "It's just the girls." I looked up, confused. "Since when?" She shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. That's what she wants. No extra people. Something about that answer didn't sit right. Sarah wasn't just anyone, she was family. She had always gone out of her way to make sure I felt included. Last year, she had insisted I sit next to her at dinner and joked that I was her favorite in-law. "So she suddenly doesn't want me there?" I asked. Emily sighed, clearly irritated. "Why are you making this a big deal?" "I'm not," I replied calmly. "I'm just asking a question." She finally turned to face me. "You always do this. You analyze everything." I leaned against the counter. "I analyze things when they stop making sense." Her jaw tightened. "I don't need to justify every plan I make." "No," I said slowly, "but when something changes without a reason, it's fair to ask why." The silence that followed felt heavier than the conversation itself. She looked away, pretending to focus on the stove, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. In that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about a birthday dinner. It was about distance. About information being filtered. About a line quietly being drawn, and me being left on the wrong side of it. I picked up my jacket. "Have a good night," I said. She didn't respond. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face, and with it came a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, uncertainty. Not about the situation, but about the person I thought I knew. And I knew then, whatever was happening had already started long before this conversation. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Emily had always been direct with me. If something bothered her, she said it. If plans changed, she explained why. Tonight, she did neither. That change mattered. The next morning, I tried to act normal. Routine has a way of hiding tension if you let it. I made coffee, checked my phone, skimmed the news. Emily moved around the house quietly, already dressed, already distant. "Did you have fun last night?" I asked casually. She hesitated for half a second too long. "Yeah. It was fine. Just fine." She nodded. "You're overthinking it." That phrase again. I didn't push further. Not because I was convinced, but because I wanted to see what would happen if I stopped asking. Sometimes people reveal more when you give them space. Over the next few days, small things started to stand out. Her phone was always face down. She took calls in another room. Messages came in late at night, followed by quick glances in my direction, like she was checking whether I noticed. I noticed everything. One afternoon, while we were sitting in the living room, she suddenly mentioned plans for the weekend. I might stay at Sarah's place overnight. I looked at her. "Since when do you stay over?" she asked. Emily replied quickly. "She needs help with something." "What kind of help?" Emily frowned. "Does it matter?" I chose my words carefully. "It matters because things feel different lately. And I'm trying to understand why." She stood up abruptly. "I can't do this," she said. "Every conversation turns into an interrogation." "That's not fair," I replied. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking because I care." She grabbed her bag. "I need some air." The door closed behind her, harder than necessary. I sat there alone, The quiet louder than any argument. That's when it hit me. I wasn't being excluded from one event. I was being slowly removed from information. And that kind of distance doesn't happen by accident. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "Hey, just wanted to check in. Are you okay? You seemed quiet lately." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. That message didn't line up with anything Emily had told me. I typed back slowly. "I'm fine. Why do you ask?" A few seconds passed. Then, no reason. Just felt like something was off. I put the phone down. That was the moment I realized something important. There were two versions of the same story being told, and I was only hearing one of them. And whatever was really happening, it was no longer just between me and Emily. I didn't reply to Sarah right away. I needed time to think, because that message confirmed what I'd been trying not to admit to myself. Emily and Sarah were clearly talking. But whatever they were discussing, I wasn't meant to be part of it. The next morning, Emily left early. She said she had errands to run, but didn't say where or with whom. Normally, that wouldn't matter. We never tracked each other's movements. Trust made that unnecessary. Or at least it used to. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table longer than usual, staring at my untouched coffee. I kept thinking about Sarah's message. "You seemed quiet lately." That wasn't something you say unless you've noticed a change, or someone pointed it out to you. I finally texted her back later that afternoon. "You don't need to worry about me," I wrote. "Things have just felt a little strange at home." Her reply came almost immediately. "That's not what Emily said." My hands tightened around the phone. "What did she say?" I asked. There was a longer pause this time. Minutes passed. I could almost picture her debating whether to answer honestly or protect whatever version she'd been given. Finally, the message came through. She said, "You've been stressed and distant lately. That you needed space." I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. That wasn't just an omission. That was a rewrite. I typed carefully. "I never asked for space. I've actually been trying to talk." Another pause. "I thought so," Sarah replied. "That's why I checked in." That confirmed it. Emily wasn't just keeping information from me. She was shaping it, managing how others saw the situation before I ever had a chance to speak. That evening, when Emily came home, I didn't bring it up right away. I wanted to see how she acted when she thought everything was under control. She was relaxed, almost cheerful. She talked about her day, mentioned Sarah casually, laughed at a joke on TV. If I hadn't been paying attention, I might have believed nothing was wrong. At one point, she looked over and asked, "You're quiet again. Everything okay?" I met her eyes. I was thinking about how easily things change when people stop being honest. Her smile faded. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said calmly, "that I talked to Sarah today." Her body stiffened. Just for a moment. But it was enough. "What did you say to her?" she asked. "I told her the truth," I replied. "That things feel off, and I've been trying to talk to you." Her expression hardened. I didn't want to drag her into our problems. "Our problems?" I repeated. "You already did. You just did it without me." The room went quiet again, heavier this time. She looked away, jaw clenched, like someone deciding whether to defend a lie or finally let it go. In that silence, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about miscommunication anymore. It was about control. And once I saw that, I knew this situation was heading somewhere neither of us could avoid. The next few days felt like walking through a house where the furniture had been quietly rearranged. Everything looked familiar, but nothing felt the same. Emily avoided direct conversations. If I asked something simple, she answered briefly and moved on. If I tried to talk about how distant we'd become, she accused me of reading too much into things. It was exhausting not because we were fighting, but because we weren't. Real arguments at least bring things into the open. This was something else entirely. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I hadn't planned to look at it. I never had before. Privacy had always been a mutual understanding between us. But the screen lit up with Sarah's name, and my stomach tightened. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't unlock it. I just stood there, staring at the notification until the screen went dark again. That single moment told me everything I needed to know. Whatever was happening, it was ongoing, active, and I was still being kept out of it. The next morning, Emily told me she'd be staying at Sarah's place for the weekend after all. She still needs help, she said casually, pouring herself coffee. With what? I asked. She shrugged. Stuff. I watched her closely. You used to tell me details. She sighed. Do you really need to know everything? I answered honestly. When everything suddenly changes. Yes. She set her mug down a little harder than necessary. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. That sentence felt rehearsed. Like she'd practiced saying it enough times that it no longer felt dishonest to her. After she left for work, I sat alone in the living room, replaying the last few weeks in my head. The exclusion. The rewritten stories. The quiet coordination happening just outside my reach. I decided I was done guessing. That afternoon, I drove to Sarah's place unannounced. Not to confront her, but to hear things directly. If there were two versions of the story, I wanted to know where they started to diverge. When Sarah opened the door, surprise flashed across her face. Oh, hey, she said. I didn't expect you. I know, I replied. That's kind of the point. She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. We sat at her kitchen table, the same one where Emily had apparently spent so much time lately. I didn't waste time. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Sarah nodded slowly. What exactly has Emily been telling you about me? She looked down at her hands. She said you were overwhelmed, that you didn't want to be involved in certain things anymore. That's not true, I said quietly. I figured, she replied. That's why this has felt uncomfortable. I leaned back, absorbing that word. Uncomfortable. Because that meant Sarah felt it too. The tension. The manipulation. The missing pieces. And for the first time, I realized the situation wasn't just affecting my marriage. It was spreading. Sarah didn't speak right away. She stood up, poured herself a glass of water, then leaned against the counter like she needed something solid to hold onto. I could tell she was deciding how much to say without making things worse. I didn't want to be in the middle, she finally said. But I also didn't like feeling like I was being given half a story. I nodded. Neither do I. She took a breath. Emily's been coming over a lot lately. More than usual. At first, it was just venting. Little complaints. Things every couple goes through. I didn't think much of it. And then? I asked. And then the tone changed, she said. She started talking like decisions were already made. Like you had agreed to things I knew you wouldn't agree to. My chest tightened. What kind of decisions? Sarah hesitated. About distance. About needing space. About how you were checking out emotionally. None of that was true. I never said any of that, I said quietly. I know, she replied. That's why it felt wrong. I kept waiting for you to say something yourself. I leaned forward. Why didn't you ask me? She met my eyes. Because Emily made it sound like you didn't want anyone asking. There was not just exclusion, insulation. A version of events carefully shaped so no one would challenge it. I sat back, letting the realization settle. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. A way to move pieces around without resistance. When is she coming this weekend? I asked. Friday night, Sarah replied. She said she needed a break. A break from what, I wondered? From me? Or from keeping the story straight? I thanked Sarah for her honesty and stood to leave. At the door, she stopped me. For what it's worth, she said, I don't think she's being honest with herself either. Driving home, I felt a strange calm. Not relief. Not anger. Just clarity. Once you understand the pattern, the behavior stops feeling personal. That night, when Emily came home, I didn't bring up Sarah. I didn't ask about the weekend. I simply watched. She moved around the house with an ease that suggested she believed everything was still under control. That belief was fragile. I could feel it. Later, as we sat in silence, she finally spoke. You've been distant. I turned toward her. No, I said evenly. I've been paying attention. Her expression tightened. To what? To what's being said when I'm not in the room. She looked away, the conversation ending before it could begin. And in that moment, I understood something important. This wasn't going to resolve itself with honesty. Because honesty was the one thing no longer being offered freely. Friday night arrived faster than I expected. Emily packed lightly, the way someone does when they don't plan to stay long, or when they want the option to return whenever it suits them. She moved through the bedroom quietly, folding clothes with deliberate care, avoiding eye contact. "You'll be okay here?" she asked, not looking up. "I always am," I replied. She nodded, zipped her bag, and paused at the door as if waiting for something. A question. A plea. An argument. When none came, she simply left. The house felt unusually still after that. Not lonely, just empty in a way that made room for thought. I sat in the living room and replayed everything Sarah had told me. The rewritten narratives. The assumption that decisions had already been made. The way Emily spoke as if distance were mutual when it wasn't. That night, I didn't text. I didn't call. I didn't chase explanations. Sometimes the clearest message is silence. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Everything okay?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Nothing more. An hour later, another message arrived. "You seem cold." I set the phone down without responding. Coldness implies a lack of feeling. What I felt was focus. By midday, Sarah called. "She's restless," Sarah said. "Keeps asking if you've said anything. If you're upset." "I haven't said anything," I replied. "That's the point." Sarah sighed. "I think she expected you to push back. To argue." "People who control narratives rely on reaction," I said. "Without it, they don't know what to do." That afternoon, I took a long walk, something I hadn't done in weeks. The air was clear, the streets quiet. With every step, my thoughts organized themselves. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger clouds judgment. What I felt instead was resolve. When Emily came home Sunday evening, she looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. She set her bag down and stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to speak first. "I think we need to talk," she said finally. I nodded. "I agree." We sat across from each other at the dining table. No raised voices. No defensiveness. Just space. "I don't know how things got this way," she said. "I feel like you're shutting me out." I met her gaze. "I didn't shut you out. I stopped pretending everything was fine." She frowned. "That's not fair." "It's accurate," I replied. "You've been telling people what I feel without asking me. Making decisions that affect both of us without involving me." Her silence confirmed more than any argument could have. "I was trying to keep the peace," she said quietly. "By removing my voice?" I asked. She didn't answer. That was when I realized this conversation wasn't about fixing a misunderstanding. It was about acknowledging a choice that had already been made. And what that meant for both of us going forward. The conversation didn't end at the dining table. It followed us through the house like unfinished business, settling into every room we entered afterward. Emily tried to act normal that night. She cooked. She cleaned. She asked if I wanted tea. The routine felt forced, like muscle memory kicking in when the mind has already moved on. Later, as we sat in the living room, she broke the silence again. "I feel like you've already decided something," she said. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to be careful. Not because I was unsure, but because words, once spoken, don't return quietly. "I've decided to stop guessing," I finally said. "That's all." She leaned forward. "About what?" "About where I stand," I replied. "About whether my perspective matters in my own marriage." Her face tightened. "That's not fair. You're acting like I shut you out completely." I met her eyes. "You did. Just not loudly." She looked away, rubbing her hands together. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I believe that," I said. "But intention doesn't cancel impact." That seemed to land harder than anything else I'd said. The next few days were quiet, but not calm. Emily stayed home more. She watched me closely, like she was trying to read something she no longer understood. Every small interaction felt measured, careful, as if she were testing which version of me she was dealing with now. Midweek, Sarah called again. "She's worried," she said. "She keeps asking what you're thinking." I exhaled slowly. "Has she tried asking me directly?" Sarah hesitated. "Not really." That answer said everything. That evening, Emily finally confronted the question she'd been circling. "Are you thinking about leaving?" she asked. I didn't flinch. "I'm thinking about honesty," I said. "And whether we still have it." She swallowed. "I was trying to manage things." I nodded. "That's the problem. A marriage isn't something one person manages." She sat down heavily, the weight of that truth pressing in. "I didn't think it would turn into this," she said quietly. "Neither did I replied. "But once trust starts being filtered, it doesn't heal on its own." For the first time, she looked uncertain. Not defensive. Not angry. Just unsure of what came next. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. Whatever happened from here wouldn't depend on explanations or apologies. It would depend on whether she was willing to let go of control, and whether I was willing to stay if she didn't. The question she asked lingered long after the room went quiet. I could tell Emily expected an immediate answer. Something definitive. Something emotional. But I didn't give her that. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because decisions made under pressure tend to serve the loudest voice in the room, not the truth. The next morning, we moved around each other like strangers sharing the same space. Polite, careful, detached. It felt unnatural after years of shared routines, but also revealing. Without comfort to fall back on, patterns became easier to see. Emily tried again later that day. "I don't want to lose us," she said, standing in the doorway of my office. "But I don't know what you want anymore." I closed my laptop and looked at her. "I want transparency," I said. "Not reassurance. Not damage control. Transparency." She nodded, but something in her expression told me she didn't fully understand the difference. That evening, I suggested something I had been thinking about for days. "I think we need some space," I said calmly. "Not to punish each other. To get perspective." Her eyes widened. "You mean separation?" "I mean distance," I replied. "Time without influence. Without commentary. Without third parties shaping the story." She sat down slowly. "Sarah didn't shape anything." I didn't argue. Intent doesn't change effect. That night, she packed again, more carefully this time. Less defensively. She said she would stay with Sarah for a while. Not a weekend. Not a few days. Just a while. I helped carry her bag to the car. We stood there awkwardly, unsure how to end the moment. "I hope this helps," she said. "So do I replied. When she drove away, the house felt quieter than it had ever been. Not empty, intentional. I walked through each room slowly, noticing how much of my daily energy had been spent managing uncertainty. With Emily gone, I had space to think clearly for the first time in weeks. I called a friend I trusted. Someone who knew us both but wasn't emotionally tied to either version of events. I didn't vent. I didn't dramatize. I just laid out the facts. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. "That doesn't sound accidental," he said. "It sounds organized." That word stuck with me. Over the next few days, I wrote things down. Not accusations. Observations. Moments when information had been redirected. Conversations that never quite aligned. Patterns that only made sense when viewed together. What I saw wasn't chaos. It was control disguised as calm. And once I named it, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Because you can't rebuild trust until you're honest about what broke it, and who benefited when it did. The days without Emily passed more slowly than I expected. Not because I missed the noise, but because silence has a way of forcing clarity. With no one explaining things away or reframing conversations, I could finally see the situation for what it was. Not dramatic, not explosive, just consistently off balance. Emily checked in occasionally. Short messages. Neutral tone. "Hope you're doing okay." Just checking in. No questions. No accountability. Just enough contact to maintain presence without substance. I didn't respond right away. Not out of spite, but because I needed to understand what I actually felt before answering. Emotional reactions fade. Patterns don't. One afternoon, Sarah called. "I wanted you to hear this from me," she said carefully. "Emily's been talking about next steps. Not about fixing things, about how things will look if they don't." That tightened something in my chest. What kind of next steps? She mentioned finances. Living arrangements. How people will understand the situation. I closed my eyes briefly. That confirmed what I had suspected for weeks. She wasn't reacting to uncertainty. She was preparing for outcome. Did she mention counseling? I asked. Sarah hesitated. No. That answer told me everything. That evening, I finally replied to Emily's last message. "We need to talk, honestly, without managing how things sound to others." She responded almost immediately. "I agree. I've been wanting that too." We met 2 days later at a quiet cafe halfway between our places. Neutral ground. Public, but private enough for conversation. She arrived early, already seated, hands wrapped tightly around her cup. "You look tired," she said. "So do you," I replied. We didn't waste time with small talk. "I feel like I lost you without knowing when," she said. I nodded. "Because you stopped bringing me into decisions that affected both of us." She sighed. "I was trying to avoid conflict. By creating distance," I said calmly. "That's not avoidance. That's substitution." Her eyes filled slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "I need to ask you something," I continued. "And I need an honest answer." She nodded. "Did you start preparing for separation before you talked to me about problems?" The pause was long enough to be an answer on its own. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I thought it would be easier if things were already organized." I sat back, absorbing the weight of that confession. "Do you understand what that does to trust?" I asked. She nodded, tears forming. "I do now. But realization after the fact doesn't undo preparation." We sat there in silence for a long moment, both aware that something fundamental had shifted. Not because of one decision, but because of a series of quiet ones made without consent. As we stood to leave, she asked, "What happens now?" I answered honestly. "Now," I said, "we stop pretending this was a misunderstanding and start deciding whether honesty can exist again." After that meeting, nothing felt unclear anymore, but clarity didn't bring comfort. It brought responsibility. Once you hear the truth, even a quiet one, you can't pretend you don't know it. Emily and I didn't rush into decisions. We agreed on that much. No dramatic announcements. No explaining things to people who didn't need explanations yet. Just time, real time, without rewriting events or softening facts. A week later, she asked if we could meet again, this time somewhere private. When she arrived, she didn't sit down right away. She stood near the window, arms folded, staring outside as if rehearsing something. "I need to say this without defending myself," she began. "I didn't plan to hurt you. But I did plan for the possibility that things wouldn't work." I nodded. "And you did that alone?" "Yes," she admitted. "I told myself it was practical. Responsible. But I see now how it looked." "How it was," I corrected gently. She swallowed. "I didn't think you'd notice so soon." That line landed harder than anything else. "So this wasn't about timing," I said. "It was about assumption." She didn't argue. Over the next hour, things came out slowly. Conversations she had with Sarah that framed me as emotionally distant. Plans she considered quietly, believing she was protecting herself from uncertainty. The problem wasn't that she thought about the future, it was that she excluded me from it. "I felt like I was losing control," she said. "And instead of telling you, I tried to manage it." I leaned back. That's the moment trust starts to erode. Not when people struggle, but when they stop sharing the struggle. When we left that evening, nothing was resolved, but nothing was hidden either. That was new. Over the following weeks, we lived separately. Not angrily. Not coldly. Just separately. We spoke occasionally, usually about practical things. Bills. Scheduling. The emotional distance remained, but it felt honest now. Friends began asking questions. carefully worded ones. I didn't explain. I didn't correct stories unless they were outright false. I had learned that people fill silence with assumptions, and trying to manage that only creates more noise. One evening, Sarah called again. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Emily's been struggling. Not in the way you think. She's realizing how much she controlled instead of communicated." I listened without responding. "I don't know what that means for you," Sarah continued, "but I wanted you to know she's finally seeing it." I thanked her and hung up. Awareness is important, but it isn't the same as change. That night, sitting alone, I asked myself the only question that mattered now. Could I rebuild trust with someone who learned honesty only after preparing for life without me? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I wouldn't ignore the question. The weeks that followed were defined by distance, but not silence. Emily and I spoke occasionally, always carefully. There were no arguments left to have, no accusations waiting to be aired. What remained were facts, and facts have a way of standing still no matter how often you walk around them. One afternoon, she asked if we could meet again. "I don't want to keep talking in pieces," she said. "I want to understand what this really means for us." We met at my place this time. Neutral ground had served its purpose. If we were going to talk honestly, it had to be somewhere familiar. She looked around the living room when she arrived, like she was seeing it for the first time. Maybe she was. When people step back, perspective changes. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, sitting down slowly. "Not about outcomes. About behavior." I waited. "I didn't just prepare for separation," she continued. "I prepared for control. I told myself I was protecting myself, but really, I was managing everyone else's understanding so I wouldn't have to face confrontation." I nodded. That's the part that hurt. Not fear. Not doubt. But being edited out of my own marriage. She looked down. "I know." We talked for hours. Not in circles, but in straight lines. She admitted that once she started controlling the narrative, it became easier to justify doing it again. That each small decision felt harmless until they formed a pattern. "I didn't trust that we could talk through things," she said. "So I tried to stay ahead of them." "And in doing that," I replied, "you created exactly what you were afraid of." She didn't argue. At one point she asked quietly, "Do you think we can fix this?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't avoiding the question. I was respecting it. "I think trust can be rebuilt," I said finally. "But not quickly. And not if either of us pretends this was just poor communication." She nodded slowly. "I don't want to pretend anymore." That was the first statement she made that felt completely unguarded. Before she left, we agreed on something small but important. No decisions would be made without discussion. No stories would be told without consent. No preparation would happen in secret. It wasn't reconciliation. It was structure. After she left, I sat alone and reflected on how close we had come to something permanent without ever raising our voices. How damage doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it settles in quietly, disguised as practicality. What mattered now wasn't whether we stayed together or apart. What mattered was whether honesty could exist without supervision. And that question was still unanswered. After that conversation, something shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. Emily didn't return home, and I didn't ask her to. We kept our distance, but the rules we had agreed on held. When we spoke, it was direct. No softened language. No managing how things might sound later. Honesty, I learned, is exhausting when you're not used to it. A few days later, Emily suggested counseling. Not as a last resort, but as a way to understand why things had gone wrong without turning it into a blame exercise. "I don't want someone to fix us," she said. "I want someone to help us see clearly." That mattered. We found a counselor neither of us knew personally. Neutral. Experienced. Someone who wouldn't take sides just because one version sounded calmer than the other. The first session was uncomfortable. Not because of conflict, but because of precision. The counselor didn't let vague phrases slide. When Emily said she felt unsafe, she was asked to define what that meant. When I said I felt excluded, I had to give specific examples. There was no room for implication. Over the next few sessions, Patterns became impossible to ignore. Emily admitted that she struggled with uncertainty more than she realized. When she didn't feel in control, she tried to regain it quietly, through preparation, through influence, through shaping perception. "I didn't think of it as manipulation," she said during one session. "I thought of it as self-protection." "And when did you stop considering how it affected him?" the counselor asked gently. Emily didn't answer right away. "That's the problem," she said finally. "I didn't notice when that happened." That acknowledgement mattered more than any apology. For my part, I had to confront something too. I had assumed that stability meant safety, that long routines and calm communication meant nothing could drift without notice. I learned that avoidance can look like peace, until it isn't. Outside of counseling, life continued quietly. Friends asked fewer questions. Sarah kept her distance, respecting the fact that this was no longer something she needed to mediate. One evening, Emily and I met for dinner after a session. Not as a date, just as two people who had shared a long history. "I don't expect trust to come back quickly," she said. "I just don't want to rebuild on silence again." I appreciated that she didn't promise change, only effort. As we parted that night, I realized something important. Rebuilding trust doesn't start with forgiveness. It starts with consistency. And while I didn't know where this process would lead, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next would be based on what was said openly, not what was planned quietly. Counseling changed the rhythm of our conversations, but it didn't erase the past. What it did was remove the excuses we had both relied on for too long. There was no hiding behind tone or timing anymore. When something was said, it had to be specific. When something was felt, it had to be explained. That level of clarity was uncomfortable, especially for Emily. "I didn't realize how much I avoided direct conversations," she admitted during one session. "I thought staying calm meant staying safe." "And what did calm cost you?" the counselor asked. Emily looked at me before answering. "Trust." Outside the sessions, we stayed consistent with boundaries. We didn't slip back into daily routines. No spontaneous visits. No emotional shortcuts. If we met, it was intentional. One afternoon, she asked if we could walk through the house together. "I want to see it without pretending," she said. We moved room by room slowly. Not reminiscing. Observing. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt honest, like a place that had finally stopped absorbing tension. "I used to think distance would protect me," she said quietly. "But all it did was make things worse." I didn't respond immediately. I was thinking about how often people confuse control with safety. Later that week, the counselor asked a direct question. "What would rebuilding trust actually require from both of you?" I answered first. Transparency without preparation. No planning outcomes before conversations. Emily nodded. "And accountability, even when it's uncomfortable." Those weren't promises. They were conditions. After the session, Emily surprised me by suggesting something practical. "I think we should write things down," she said. "Not plans. Boundaries. So neither of us can rewrite them later." That suggestion mattered more than she probably realized. It showed a willingness to stop managing perception and start respecting structure. We drafted a simple agreement. Nothing legal. Just expectations. No third-party conversations about our relationship without mutual awareness. No financial or living decisions made in isolation. No silence used as a substitute for communication. It wasn't romantic. It was necessary. That night, alone again, I reflected on how close we'd come to permanent separation without ever naming it out loud. How easily marriages can drift when both people assume the other will eventually speak up. What saved us from that wasn't love. It was interruption. A pause long enough to see patterns clearly, and honesty strong enough to name them. Whether this process would lead us back together or further apart was still uncertain. But for the first time in months, the uncertainty felt shared. And that made all the difference. The agreement we wrote didn't magically fix anything, but it changed how we moved forward. For the first time in months, there were no hidden expectations. No silent scorekeeping. Just clear boundaries that forced us to slow down instead of rushing toward conclusions. Emily didn't move back in right away. That was her decision, and I respected it. Trust, we both understood now, doesn't rebuild itself through proximity. It rebuilds through consistency. We continued counseling, but the tone shifted. The sessions were no longer about uncovering damage. They were about testing behavior. The counselor paid close attention to follow-through, not intention. One session, Emily was asked a difficult question. What happens the next time you feel uncertain or afraid? She didn't answer quickly this time. I talk, she said finally. Before I plan. Before I prepare. Before I involve anyone else. The counselor nodded. And if talking feels uncomfortable? Then I sit with that discomfort instead of avoiding it, Emily replied. That answer mattered. Not because it was perfect, but because it acknowledged responsibility. Outside of counseling, life remained quiet. Friends had stopped asking questions. Sarah kept her distance, clearly understanding that stepping back was part of respecting the new boundaries. That alone told me she had finally seen what her involvement had unintentionally enabled. One evening, Emily asked if she could come by to pick up a few things. We sat in the living room afterward, not as a couple trying to repair something, but as two people checking whether honesty could exist without tension. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, she said. I don't even know if that would be healthy. I agree, I replied. Going back usually means repeating. She nodded slowly. I'm scared of failing again. So am I admitted. But pretending certainty doesn't exist is worse. She smiled faintly. You're different lately. I'm clearer, I said. There's a difference. Before she left, she paused at the door. Thank you for not turning this into a battle. I thought about that for a moment. I didn't want to win, I said. I wanted to understand what I was agreeing to. That night, alone again, I reflected on how easily marriages drift into quiet power struggles without either person noticing. How often harm happens not through cruelty, but through avoidance dressed up as peace. Whatever happened next wouldn't be decided by fear or control. It would be decided by repetition. Whether new habits could replace old ones. Whether honesty could remain steady when things felt uncertain. Whether both of us could resist the urge to manage outcomes instead of sharing them. Those questions didn't have immediate answers. But they were finally being asked out loud. Time did what conversations alone could not. Weeks passed, then months, and the patterns we had talked about were finally tested in real situations. Not in counseling rooms or careful conversations, but in ordinary moments where habits usually return unnoticed. Emily didn't move back in right away. We agreed not to rush that decision. Instead, we focused on something simpler and harder at the same time: consistency. When something felt off, it was said out loud. When uncertainty showed up, it wasn't managed quietly or shared with others first. It was brought directly to the person it affected. That didn't make things easy. It made them honest. There were moments when old instincts tried to surface. Times when Emily wanted to plan ahead instead of talk, or when I wanted to withdraw instead of engage. But those moments didn't pass unnoticed anymore. We had learned what silence could cost. One evening, after a long counseling session, Emily said something that stayed with me. I used to think control meant safety, she said. Now I realize it just delayed consequences. I nodded. And I thought stability meant nothing could break if we stayed calm. Neither of us was proud of those realizations, but they were necessary. Eventually, Emily moved back home, not as a reset, not as a victory, but as a choice we both made with full awareness. There were no promises about forever. No dramatic declarations. Just an understanding that rebuilding trust wasn't about erasing the past, but about refusing to repeat it. Sarah and I spoke once more after that. Briefly. Respectfully. She apologized for stepping into something that wasn't hers to manage. I accepted it without reopening old wounds. Boundaries, once established, didn't need to be explained again. Life returned to a rhythm, but not the old one. This version was quieter, slower, and more deliberate. Conversations happened sooner. Assumptions were questioned. Decisions were shared before they became plans. One night, sitting together in the living room, Emily said, I don't ever want us to end up talking around each other again. Neither do I replied. That's where we lost each other. We both understood then that what nearly ended our marriage wasn't one argument or one decision. It was a series of small choices made without transparency, each one easy to justify in the moment. What saved it wasn't forgiveness alone. It was interruption. A pause long enough to notice the pattern. And the willingness to stop it before it became permanent. Not every story ends with certainty. Some end with clarity instead. This one did.